And now Hans Niemann, he takes the bishop, but in doing so, he gives up the queen. Chess YouTube, what is happening? This right here is the latest and greatest gameplay between Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen, two players who need absolutely no introduction. They just played this game this week in the Titled Tuesday tournament on chess.com, and this game was absolutely insane. All right, in the game, Hans, playing as white, opens 1e4, best by test, and Magnus 1e5. Then we have knight f3, knight c6, and then 3, bishop c4, the Italian opening. Hans Niemann is one of the biggest specialists in this opening as white, and the idea is very simple. You want to castle, go maybe c3, d3, knight d2, f1, g3, and so on. It's a very simple but very, very strong way to play as white. Now, in the game, Magnus, he goes for the two knights defense, knight f6, pressuring the pawn on the e4 square. Hans defends with d3, and then bishop c5. Now, both sides castle. We have castles, and then castles, then h3, guarding g4, and then finally Magnus d6. So far, so good. Now Hans, c3, gaining control of d4 and setting up d4 ideas in the future. A very, very standard idea. And black here has a few different ideas. The main moves here for black are bishop b6, a6, and a5, and in the game, Magnus goes for maybe the most solid one, and the main line here for black, that is simply a6. Now, the idea behind a6 is simple. White at some point may go d4 or b4, driving back this bishop. Therefore, a6 gives the bishop on c5 a retreat square on a7 to go back to in the future, and black may even go bishop a7 before white goes b4 or d4 as a simple prophylactic measure. All right, from here, Hans, rook e1, then black, h6, guarding g5. So far, so good. And now here, Hans, he's played almost all of the standard ideas as white, and it is time to decide on a plan. And white has two main ideas against this a6 line from black. The first line, the main line, is to go b4 and a4, threatening b5 later. That is the absolute main line here for white. However, Hans is a big specialist in the other idea where you don't move these pawns at all, and you just go knight b2, knight b to d2, to f1, to g3, and threaten d4. It's a very simple but very strong way to play. Now, which plan will Hans go for? In this game, he actually goes for the queenside expansion with the move a4. Now, I don't know that I've ever seen Hans go for this a4, b4 idea against the a6 setup from black. So this might be a first for Hans. And by the way, this is the absolute main line here from white. All right, black, bishop a7, and then Hans, sure enough, b4 going down the absolute main line here. Now, Magnus here, he's made all of these standard moves. The bishop is back on a7, where it's nice and safe and sound. He's guarding g5 with h6 and so on. And now the main line for black involves going rook to e8, and then bishop e6, challenging white's Italian bishop on c4. That is perhaps the strongest way to play. There are other ideas. Queen to e7, threatening bishop e6 is also possible, and so on. But rook e8 is by far the main move here for black. However, in this game, Magnus, he mixes things up and plays a slightly different idea, almost as strong, certainly playable, but certainly different. He plays the move knight to e7. Now, what is the idea behind this move? It's simple. Black here, he wants to go knight g6, controlling e5, and from there goes c6 and maybe even d5, fighting for control of the center. Now, this plan is a plan that white normally plays, but black here can also go for it. Now, the only drawback of this move is it's a little bit slow, and this knight, it's not controlling the center. And here, Hans finds a good way to punish this immediately, and he plays the move d4, seizing control of the center, as obviously that knight on e7, it's not on c6, and therefore it does not control d4 at all. All right, from here, Hans going for literally the, what do you call this? The pawn avalanche in the center on the queen side. All the pawns going down the board as soon as possible. All right, Magnus. Knight g6 is the move, a solid move here from black. And then here, Hans, bishop d3. He retreats the bishop and guards e4. And from here, both sides go for a plan involving basically centralizing all of their pieces as much as possible and sort of developing but waiting and not really committing to any plan yet. So black, rook e8, Hans, knight b d2, Black c6, a good move guarding d5 and setting up the idea of d5 in the future if it is a good opportunity. Now Hans, he's got a lot of moves here. All of his pieces are on pretty good squares, and here he sort of has to just continue developing. For example, queen c2 might be a move. Bishop b2 might be a move. The computer even likes the idea of rook to a3, the rook lift on the third rank, intending perhaps c4 later with the rook being active on these squares. Instead, in the game, Hans, he plays the move bishop to c2, retreating the bishop, a curious looking move. It's not really clear what this move does. However, it does clear the d file a little bit and therefore increases white control of d4 in the future. For example, if white goes knight f1 to g3, that would be the case. All right, Magnus, queen c7, a solid move. The queen is technically a little better placed on c7 versus d8. And now Hans does go knight f1, continuing that rerouting process for that knight, intending knight g3, potentially on the next move. Now here, Magnus finds a very, very strong move to get immediate counterplay on the queen side. And this move surprised me a little bit at first. However, it's very, very strong. That is the move a5. Now here, with this move, Magnus, what he's trying to do is take on b4, and then Hans would have to take back with the c-pawn like this. For example, if Han wastes a move like knight g3, and then black takes and white takes back, suddenly the pawn on d4 is loose, the e4 pawn is kind of loose, and Magnus would be fighting back in the game immediately. So Hans, he does not go knight g3. Instead here, he simply takes on the a5 square, b takes a5, a good move, and now Magnus recaptures with the queen. Queen takes a5. All right, now Magnus here, he has pressure on the pawn on c3, and Hans probably should defend it. However, he ignores the pawn and plays the move knight to g3. Was Hans bluffing? Was it a mistake? Did he not see the attack on the pawn? Certainly, the future world champion saw the attack on the pawn. There's no way a future world champion wouldn't see that move. However, Hans here ignores the attack, and Magnus, I'm not sure if he missed the idea, if he was scared of something, but he also doesn't take on c3. That is the strongest move by far. The queen is fine, but in the game, instead, bishop e6 was played by the goat. All right, Hans, bishop d2. He defends the pawn and sets up sort of like some c4 ideas with a discovered attack on the queen by the bishop. In response, Magnus, queen c7 is the move, retreating a simple move, and then rook b1. The rook slides over and pressures the b file. Now, from here, both sides, they sort of have their pawns on the ideal squares, at least for now, and neither side really wants to do too much to upset the balance. So both sides start developing without doing anything too committal. So here, Magnus, rook a d8. Centralizing move, nothing too complicated about it, and Hans, queen to c1. Okay, this move has aggressive intentions. Hans here, he might be threatening some sort of sacrifice on h6 with the bishop, maybe that, maybe knight to f5 ideas, attacking these pawns. There are some ideas floating in the air, and even if the attack doesn't work yet, Magnus, the entire game, is going to have to calculate, is the sacrifice being threatened? Do I have to defend? And for that reason here, Magnus, he just goes king to h7, defending against all of the threats immediately, not having to worry about it, as now, if white takes on h6, black takes back with the g-pawn, and black is going to be perfectly fine. All right, from here, Hans, bishop e3 is the move, then rook to a8, and then queen to d2. So Hans reorganizing his pieces, and so far he has pretty much every piece on a pretty much ideal square. So how is Hans going to make progress in this game? He's got a nice edge here. He's got a very strong pawn center. His knight's perfectly placed. His bishops, his queen, his rooks. Everything here is just on the ideal square. But how does he make progress? Obviously, he can't just go like back and forth forever. At some point, he has to do something. So let's see what he does. Magnus here, rook a d8, then queen c1, then rook to a8. Magnus here sort of offering a draw. If Hans wants it, he can go queen d2, rook to d8, queen to c1, rook to a8, and so on. And Magnus here offering the draw, knowing that he's a little bit worse versus the future world champion. All right, Hans, queen b2 is the move, sliding up with the queen, and Magnus rook e7, sliding back with the rook and defending. Now rook b d1, queen to a5, queen to a3, rook a to e8, and then bishop d2. Hans sliding his bishop back and threatening potentially c4 at some point with the discovered attack on the queen. Magnus, he sees this and goes queen to c7. Now Hans, he goes back with the bishop, bishop e3. And both sides are sort of doing this dance so far in this game, neither side really committing to anything. And here, black plays the move king to g8. Okay, but Hans, he sees that this pawn on d6 is hanging. You can literally take it and win the free pawn. But is that actually a free pawn? And is that a good idea? And did Hans play that move in the game? I mean, all excellent questions. If you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to figure out, is this move here, queen takes d6, is that a good move right here? Or is it a fatal mistake? And did Hans actually play it in the game? Well, go ahead and comment down below what you think. Did he play this move? Is it a good idea? What are the complications? Again, comment down below. But here, Hans, he takes the pawn, but this, it turns out, is a massive, and I mean massive, mistake. The winning idea for black is simple. c5. At that point, the queen is literally trapped. It literally has no square, and black simply threatens bishop b8, trapping the queen on the spot. Now, Magnus, he doesn't see this apparently, and instead goes queen takes c3. Both sides in time pressure, by the way. Both sides have about 1 minute left on the clock, so they're playing as fast as they can here. All right, Hans, he takes on e5. D takes e5. He wins the pawn, and black goes rook to d7, sliding over and attacking the queen on d6. Now, the queen has to get hightail out of there, but where do you go with the queen? c5 is covered by the bishop, b4 by the queen, a3 also by the queen. Hans, he's got literally no squares for the piece. Where can it go? Everything is being covered by at least one piece. And Hans Niemann here, he simply gives up the queen. He takes the bishop on a7. Black takes the queen, and white takes back the rook on d6. Now, real fast, let's slow down and do inventory. What the heck happened? Obviously, Magnus has the extra queen. What does Hans Niemann have in return? Well, he has the one extra pawn, the extra minor piece, and the extra rook. Effectively, a bishop, pawn, and rook for the queen. And according to my math skills, both sides have about 9 points here. The queen being worth about 9 pawns or 9 points, and the bishop, pawn, and rook being worth about 9 pawns or 9 points. But I do want to point out, this is my personal opinion right here. In my personal experience, it is always, always, always way easier to play with the queen instead of the minor piece, pawn, rook, or the 2 rooks, or the 3 minor pieces. In my personal opinion, it's always easier to play with the queen. Now, the computer says roughly level, but again, in my personal experience, it's so much easier to win with the queen, as the queen can zip around in all these directions and just pick off pieces, whereas the opponent has to coordinate every single piece perfectly together, or they lose on the spot. Let's see what happens. Let's see if my theory is true here. All right. Here in the game, Magnus, knight d5 is the move. And then here, Hans Niemann, the best move as white involves taking the knight on the e5 square. Now, instead, he goes knight d4, and this move looks super logical. You're eyeing f5, you're eyeing e6, you're threatening to win the bishop. But it turns out this move pretty much loses on the spot. Here, Magnus, queen to a5. The queen slides out and threatens the bishop. And where can the bishop go? The knight blocks the bishop. When it was an f3, the piece here could go back to, say, d4 or e3. But now those squares are not accessible. And literally in one move, Hans Niemann, playing without the queen, he throws away equality and gets into a vastly worse position. Here, Hans, he takes on e6, and Magnus takes the bishop. Queen takes a7. Now we have knight c7 attacking the rook, but rook d8, black threatens the pawn, and black here is coordinating very, very well. The queen's very active, these 2 knights, the rook, everything is good. Meanwhile, the white pieces are on all of these kind of weird, awkward squares, and white does not have the ideal, what is the word? Not synergy, the ideal, there's a word for it. What is the word? The ideal piece coordination. That is the phrase, not the word, the phrase. The piece coordination. All right, here, Hans, rook e d1 defends the pawn, and then g6, now knight e2, and then queen to c5. The queen enters back into the game, but of course there are these different discovered attacks with the bishop. It can go to, say, b3, b3, b1, or d3. In the game, bishop b1 chosen, opening up the attack on the queen, but this does not help at all. Queen to a3, black flies in, threatens the pawn, and now there are so many pawns under attack, and black here is just completely dominating. All right, the move is f4, attacking the knight, then knight e d7, the knight retreats, and very easily blockades that pass pawn on d6. Now, Hans, rook c3 attacks the queen, but queen takes a4, wins the pawn, and opens up the attack on the pawn on the e4 square, and Magnus here is in firm control of the game, being up a little bit of material, having the queen versus the rook and the minor piece. All right, now, bishop c2 is the move, attacks the queen again, and then queen to a7. The queen slides back, attacks the king, and beyond that, the queen is very, very safe on the a7 square. Now, king to f1 is the move, then knight c5, then e5 attacks the knight on the f6 square, and then knight c to e4. The knight jumps in, ignores the attack, and instead counterattacks on the rook on c3. But can white take the knight on f6? It turns out you can, but it's not a very good idea. I mean, among other issues, if you take the knight, you actually get checkmated on f2 in one move. So obviously that would not be a good idea for white. So back to this position. Here instead, rook to f3 was played, defending f2 with the rook, a good move by the future world champion Hans Niemann. Now, queen to a2, the queen slides down, and then knight d4 defends the bishop, which was under attack by the queen. Now here, it turns out Magnus has an absolutely diabolical move that would set the board on fire. This move is totally insane. If you like puzzles, again, pause the video right now and try to find this insane move for Magnus. This one will blow your socks off, I guarantee it. Comment down below if you think you saw it. The move is knight takes d6, and I'll let you comment down below, why do you think that move is so good right here? Give me your best shot, Chess YouTube. All right, instead, in the game, queen to c4 was played, attacking the king on the f1 square. The king slides over, and then Magnus, sure enough, he takes the pawn on d6. Now, this is not quite as strong here as it was the prior move, but it's still a very good idea. All right, what is the idea? If white takes the knight, black takes back with the rook, and he simply eliminates those very strong pawns on d6 and e5. The knights are vulnerable. Black's pieces all get lit on fire, and black will just be crushing in this middle game, end game scenario, whatever you want to call it. All right, here, the best move for Hans is the intermediate move, bishop b3, attacking the queen and opening up the attack on this diagonal. That is how you coordinate the white pieces, but instead, Hans, in time pressure, he's got 8 seconds left versus the 8 for Magnus. Literally anything can happen here. He takes on d6 with the pawn, and black takes on d6 with the rook. Now, bishop b3 comes anyway, but it's a little bit too little, too late, because queen c5, the queen slides back, pins the knight on d4 to the king on the g1 square, and threatens simply rook takes d4. And what can white do? He slides the rook over, trying to defend rook f d3, but is it enough? Queen b6 attacks the knight on b6 and maintains the pin on the knight on the d4 square. Magnus, I mean, it's like a game of Twister, and Magnus is just twisting up his opponent, Hans Niemann here. All right, knight to a8. The knight flies back to the back rank, and then queen to a5. The queen gets out of the attack and again threatens the knight. Now here, Hans, he plays a very creative idea. I mean, he's got 2 seconds left. He's in time pressure. So is Magnus. You got to love this idea by the future world champion. He plays the move, knight takes c6. Trying to complicate the game in time pressure, trying to literally swindle the game away from the goat. All right, black, he takes immediately on c6 with the rook. Rook takes c6 is the move. Then rook d8 attacks the king, king g7, and then king to h1, sliding off this diagonal. There are no queen c5 check ideas anymore. Now, rook c1, the rook flies down. It is a deflection sacrifice. The idea being, if you take the rook, the other rook on d8 hangs as well. Magnus finding this crazy idea in literally less than 1 second. All right, here, Hans, he takes the rook. So does black. Queen takes d8, and then knight c7, trying to get the knight back into the game. And again, the big problem that white has in this scenario is it is so much harder to coordinate the knight, the bishop, and the rook versus just the queen and the knight. And that makes black's game so much easier, not to mention black here being up material, being up the queen versus the bishop and rook, and also having an extra pawn on the queen's side. So black here is just completely crushing. Can Hans hold on? Let's see. Queen d2 attacks the rook. Rook c4. Queen to e3 attacks the bishop. Bishop c2, and then knight to h5. Magnus here, threatening ideas like taking on f4 or knight g3, attacking the king. The knight comes in, and the knight and the queen synergize absolutely perfectly in this attack. All right, Hans, knight d5, attacks the queen and defends f4. A good move. Hans here doing everything he can to defend in extreme time pressure. He's down to 3 seconds on the clock, but we have queen d2, sliding back and attacking the queen and maintaining the attack on the pawn on f4. Now, here Hans, king to h2. The king slides up, but he forgot about the attack on the knight. King to h2, queen takes d5, and in this position, Hans Niemann, he runs out of time on the clock before he even has the chance to resign to the goat. Wow. What a game between Magnus and Hans Niemann, or should I say Hans and Magnus, from this week's Title Tuesday tournament. This game was just absurd. I mean, the weird pawn capture leading into the queen sack with like this really, really wild stuff. My theory right now is like undefeated, that the queen is so much easier to play with versus any other piece combination. The 3 minor pieces, the rook, pawn, bishop, the 2 rooks. In my opinion, the queen is always easier to play, so keep that in mind in your own games. Try to avoid giving up the queen for even material, because again, this theory of mine, it just holds true over and over and over. Although the computer says the game here is equal, playing with the queen is always so much easier. So little tidbit for you. All right, Chess YouTube, that is all for today. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and smash that YouTube like button. Thank you so much for doing that. It does help this video reach more people, so please smash that like button. Comment down below. Who do you support, Hans Niemann or Magnus? I mean, I'm day 8 out of 30 in terms of supporting Hans Niemann. So you'll see the endgame.ai link above my floating head right here. So my goal is to get Hans Niemann's attention and show that he's not the only person in the chess world that believes in him. Right now, he's trying to claim that, but after my 30-day free marketing blitz for him, he can no longer say that there are no chess influencers who openly support Hans. So I've supported him openly on my channel from day 1 on this YouTube channel, including in my analysis of the Sequoia Cup game from 2022, but I digress. Anyways, there's only one way this campaign ends. Sooner or later, Hans is going to collaborate with me in some capacity. Is going to happen, Chess YouTube. So that is my belief. It will happen. And that is all for today. And as always, I wish you the best of luck in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond. And I'll see you in the next video.